Hello and welcome to the NevilleResearch.com video. Today I want to talk about Love's Martyr. And Love's Martyr is a key to solving the Shakespeare Authorship Question. It's also one of the most confusing and mysterious books ever published, and it has really not been understood at all. So there's been a lot of research on the book, and some people have recognized some of the important aspects of the book, but nobody's figured out the whole story. And I think I have figured out the whole story. So I'm going to introduce the book here and sort of talk about some of my ideas about it. Now, the title page describes it as Roselyns Complaint. That's sort of the first poem in the book. And it's allegorically shadowing the truth of love in the constant fate of the phoenix and turtle. So the poem is about the phoenix and the turtle, and the reference to the turtle is not to the amphibian, it's to the bird called the turtle dove. So it's a poem about a phoenix and a turtle dove and their death together. Okay? And William Shakespeare, of course, contributed a poem to this book, which people call The Phoenix and the Turtle. And it's really the only poem that Shakespeare ever contributed to a book. So it's just a focal point where we can get some information about who wrote the works of Shakespeare, because whoever wrote the works of Shakespeare was somehow involved in the production of this book in one way or another. Now, the title page gives us some information on this poem. It says that it's a poem interlaced with much variety and rarity, okay, puffing it up a little bit. But then it says two things that are false, okay? So it says, now first translated out of the venerable Italian. So it's saying that it's an Italian translation, a translation from Italian by Torquato Cagliano, okay? Now, there's nobody by this name. That's a fake name. And it's not a translation out of Italian. So these are two false things on this title page. And then it says that Robert Chester is the one who did this. Now, there's been a lot of dispute about who Robert Chester was and why he wrote this book and everything else about Robert Chester. And I'm telling you right now, Robert Chester did not write this book. There were people named Robert Chester, and I believe actually that they used this name intentionally, whoever wrote this book, but this book was not written by Robert Chester. So this is step one in solving this riddle, is realizing that when they tell you one thing that's not true, and another thing that's not true, the third thing's not true either, okay? So this is step one in understanding this book. Then it goes on to talk about the section about King Arthur, which is something that nobody talks about with this book. It has a whole section about King Arthur, and this is written by a new British poet. And I want you to look at this word British here, okay? It doesn't say English poet. It says British poet. So I want you to think about that as we go forward. Why would the word be British poet here instead of English poet? Because this book was printed in 1601, according to this, right? In 1601, the politics were a little bit different and would have been more appropriate to call it an English poet. But this has British poet on it. So we're going to talk about this in great detail going forward. And not a spoiler, but let me tell you, this 1601 date is also false. So this book was not printed in 1601. This book was printed probably in 1603 and 1604, and after the death of Queen Elizabeth. And this is the main thing about this book. The phoenix, as many people have pointed out, and many people have realized, the phoenix allegory in this book is about Queen Elizabeth. And the turtle dove is almost certainly the Earl of Essex. But people have realized this fact, but it's impossible that such a book was published in 1601. While Queen Elizabeth was alive, the year when the Essex Rebellion was quashed and people were executed. Okay? So the key to solving this thing is to realize that 1601 is a fake date. And Robert Chester is not the person who actually wrote this book. And once you realize those two things, the whole thing makes perfect sense. So I'm going to go through this, explain some of my ideas about this, and this is just step one in my analysis. So there are 4 copies of Love's Martyr in existence. 2 of them have the 1601 title page, 1 has no title page, and the one in the British Library has a 1611 title page. So, if the mystery wasn't enough for you, here's another part of the mystery. Why does one of the copies have a different title page? Now, people have suggested that the first edition didn't sell very well, so they repackaged it with a different title page and put it back on sale in 1611. I think this is a mistake. There's no evidence for this. This is just speculation. It's a long time from 1601 to 1611, and there's really no evidence for this as what actually happened. Now, this is a photo I took at the British Library of the 1611 edition. It's a completely different title page. It says The Annuals of Great Britain, or Most Excellent Monument. It almost has no information on the poem at all. So you look at this title page, it doesn't say anything about Phoenix and the Turtle. There's no mention of Robert Chester. There's no mention of anything. So why this title page was produced, who produced it, what was the purpose, is a mystery. And it's very hard to know. My guess is that the book was never actually sold in bookshops, that it was a private publication, and that somebody at some point wanted to hide it or obscure its contents, and so produced this title page. But this again is a mystery. So we have this title page, and it's just a huge mystery of what's going on here. So this dedication is one of the key points to understanding this book. Now, the dedication is not included in the 1611 version of the book, but the 1601 versions do have it. And it says, "To the honorable and of me before all other honored knight, Sir John Salisbury, one of the esquires of the body to the Queen's most excellent majesty, Robert Chester," so we have Robert Chester as the author, "wisheth increase of virtue and honor," and then it says, "Honorable Sir." Now, this is very interesting because the word honorable is repeated many times. And John Salisbury was knighted for his role in fighting against the Essex Rebellion. So in June of 1601, he was knighted by the Queen, and apparently some of his cousins were part of the Essex Rebellion. So he was sort of fighting against his own family, and he was knighted by the Queen for this work. And he's called honorable, honored, honor, and honorable. Now, what I'm going to suggest here is that you should think back to Julius Caesar, and Brutus is an honorable man. And I really think that this is sort of meant ironically here. So this mention of honor and being honorable is a sort of ironic statement about John Salisbury. Now, the poem, many people suggested the poem is about Queen Elizabeth and the Earl of Essex. And people will say, well, if they're praising John Salisbury, it can't possibly be about that because he fought against the Essex Rebellion. But that's because people don't understand this is meant ironically. Now, the increase of virtue and honor. This at first glance looks like a common trope in these types of dedications, and it is a common type of thing that was written, but there's a way to read this ironically as well, right? So it says, Robert Chester wisheth increase of virtue and honor. It could mean something like, you're deficient in virtue and honor, so we wish you to have an increase of it. Now, this sort of language is used in other ways, but usually it's paired with something else, like increase of virtue and good health or something. But here it's just sort of left blank. He just wishes you an increase of virtue and honor. So this whole dedication reads at first glance like a normal dedication, but if you turn it around, it has an ironic meaning. And this is my overall theory about this whole thing. First of all, the book was published after the death of Queen Elizabeth. And second of all, the dedication to John Salisbury was meant ironically, sort of an insult to him. And third of all, Robert Chester is a pseudonym or an allonym. It's the name of a real person, but he wasn't the person who actually wrote this book. So this is really the only reason anybody cares about Love's Martyr, because of this poem by William Shakespeare. And this is just the last part of the poem. So there's two parts of the poem, and the last part is sort of important because it shows you very clearly what's going on here, okay? It says beauty, truth, and rarity. So this rarity harkens back to the title page, which mentions uses the word rarity, and the poem Roslins Complaint also uses the word rarity as well. Grace in all simplicity, here enclosed in cinders lie. Death is now the phoenix nest, okay? And the turtle's loyal breast to eternity doth rest, okay? So this is a poem about the death of the phoenix and the turtle. And if you read the entire book, there's really no question that the phoenix is a reference to Queen Elizabeth. And Queen Elizabeth was identified with the phoenix. And I can give many examples of this, but there's just no question that Queen Elizabeth was connected with the phoenix. And this book is about the death of the phoenix. So the traditional explanation is while Queen Elizabeth was alive, Richard Field printed this book in 1601, immediately after the Essex Rebellion, that talks about the death of the phoenix. It's not reasonable. And it talks about, for these dead birds sigh a prayer. That they're going to publish this book about the death of the phoenix while she's alive is not reasonable. That William Shakespeare would put his name on this book. And remember, William Shakespeare's play, Richard II, was acted immediately before the Essex Rebellion. The conspirators paid to have Richard II acted. And people are suggesting that William Shakespeare, not just William Shakespeare, but George Chapman and Ben Jonson and John Marston all decided in 1601 to write poems about the phoenix and the turtle, about their death, and have their names put on them in this book, right when everybody's crazy about the Essex Rebellion and there have been all these executions. They thought that was the time to put their name on something. And William Shakespeare never put his name on anything before or after, but he decided to do this in 1601. All right? So it makes no sense. And so what many people say, well, the poem isn't about Queen Elizabeth or isn't about the Essex Rebellion. But if you actually read it, it is about Queen Elizabeth and the Essex Rebellion. So there's an incoherence, there's an inconsistency here. There's a very simple way to solve it, and that's to say it was printed after Queen Elizabeth's death. So right before Shakespeare's poem, we have a poem by Ignoto. And Ignoto just means anonymous. So whoever wrote this wanted to stay anonymous. And it's a short poem, but it talks about the world one phoenix till another burns. And then at the end it says, her rare dead ashes fill a rare live urn, one phoenix born, another phoenix burn. So it's a very, very explicit that the allegory of Phoenix and the Turtle is about the phoenix and also the turtle burning, and then so a new one can be born, right? And that's the allegory of the whole Roselyns Complaint poem too, is that to create a new greater phoenix, they need to be martyred. It's called love's martyr, right? So they're sort of martyred together to create the new phoenix. So it's a very explicit allegory, and the allegory is carried over, as we saw, into Shakespeare's poem, which is about the death of the two birds. And then now I want to show you something else that makes it very clear what's going on here. So this is something that other people have talked about. This is from 1605, and it's from a translation of the works of Du Bartas, the poet. And this has the exact same metaphor we've been talking about. As when the Arabian only bird doth burn, so that's a clear reference to the phoenix as the Arabian bird. Her aged body, Queen Elizabeth was quite old, in sweet flames to death, out of her cinders, and this word cinders we saw is actually used in Shakespeare's poem, a new bird hath breath. A new true phoenix lively flourisheth, whom greater glories than the first adorn. So the new phoenix is even better than the first phoenix. And this poem is important because it very clearly references King James as the new phoenix. So we have a situation here where in 1605, the exact, not even like sort of the same metaphor, the exact same metaphor, word for word, is used about the death of Queen Elizabeth and the rise of King James. So we have two possibilities here. Somebody wrote Love's Martyr in 1601 after the Essex Rebellion with an allegory that fits perfectly Essex and Queen Elizabeth, and a bunch of poems that make perfect sense in terms of Queen Elizabeth dying and a new greater phoenix being born. And in 1605, that was written in 1601 while Queen Elizabeth was alive. And then in 1605, randomly, somebody picked up that allegory and wrote a poem using the exact same words. So it's just a random coincidence. Or, after the death of Queen Elizabeth, somebody wrote Love's Martyr, dedicated it to John Salisbury in an ironic manner, put a false date on the book, and was having a lot of fun, and was able to get, and therefore, since there was no danger at that time, was able to get Shakespeare and John Marston and George Chapman and Ben Jonson to contribute poems. So everybody's going to have to think about what's the most likely scenario. Is the title page absolutely have to be believed, or can logic and reason win in this debate? So I have a lot more I can share about the textual reasons and the logical reasons for why we should think that Love's Martyr was printed in 1603 or 1604. But this is a historical factual question. This isn't a literary question. And we have these printed books, and it should be possible to, or it may be possible to examine them and determine when exactly they were printed. And I've discovered something very interesting. So there's a secondary title page for the book that is before the poems by Shakespeare and Johnson and Marston and Chapman. And this title page also references the true noble knight, John Salisbury, right? Once again, true noble, noble. And it has the date 1601 in Roman numerals. But there is this ornament here, this device that is Richard Field's. And if you examine it really closely, let me zoom in as much as I can here so you can see it. There's a crack in this ornament, okay? So the crack extends from here to here. So it's very clearly goes all the way through. There's this crack. And I've been working very hard to accumulate photos of this crack. And the crack is real. It's in every book from the period. And I believe I've been able to sort of determine how that crack expanded over time. So this is the Folger Library copy of the book of Love's Martyr. And this is the crack. And you can see how it extends from here to here. It goes all the way through. Now, down here, we have the Huntington Library crack. And it's identical. So, with the cracks, there can be a lot of different issues in the inking and whatever else that changes how they appear. But this is the Huntington Library crack, and you can see it goes all the way through to here. It's exactly the same crack as the Folger Library crack. And then this is the British Library crack. It's a little harder to see. Let me zoom out a little bit here. I took this photo, but you can see once again, it goes all the way. So we have this crack in all three of these editions. It's the same crack and it goes all the way through. So I want this to be your baseline. And I want everyone to see this so they understand that I'm not making something up. This is a real thing going on here, a real crack. And by examining these cracks and examining other books Richard Field printed around that time, as far as I can tell, we can establish that this book was printed in 1603 or 1604. Now, here we have a book printed in 1604. Now, it must have been printed quite late in 1604, because it's the record of a sermon that was preached on May 13th, 1604. So this is a book relatively late 1604. And it has the 1604 date. And this was also printed by Richard Field. Obviously, it's the same device here. And if we zoom in, we have the same crack that goes all the way through, but it seems to extend even further. So I think it's hard to see, but it's quite clear that the crack extends all the way through. And maybe the inking was a little bit different, so some of the crack doesn't show through as well, but you can see the whole crack, and there seems to be an extension of the crack down to here. So this is an example from 1604. Now this book is from 1603, and it's the same ornament, obviously. And if we zoom in a little bit, you can see the same crack goes all the way and doesn't really seem to extend here. Okay, so once again, we have the crack in 1603 at the full length here. The full length you can see. Similar, very similar to the Love's Martyr cracks. Now, here we have a book from 1602. From 1602, and let's zoom in on the crack. and the crack doesn't seem to go all the way through. Okay? So, crack is still here, but it doesn't seem to go all the way through here. So, what I'm suggesting is that we have a situation where this book was probably published at the end of 1603 or the beginning of 1604. It was printed then. And I have a lot more cracks. We can look at from 1601 and 1600. And I'm going to be giving a lot more information on this. But I just wanted to sort of preview. This whole video is sort of a preview of my argument. And I have much more depth to go into all these issues. The point of this video was to give an overview of my theory on Love's Martyr. And to summarize, this 1601 date is false. The book was printed probably at the end of 1603 or the beginning of 1604. Robert Chester is an allonym. It means he probably was a real person, but he didn't write the book. And the dedication to John Salisbury is meant ironically. It's meant as an insult, in fact. I've just sort of scratched the surface of my research on these issues in this video, but I want to introduce the overall idea and get people ready for what's coming. There's a lot more coming, and I think we can solve the riddle of the phoenix and the turtle, and by solving it, we're going to get very close to solving the Shakespeare authorship question. So, thank you for coming. Please click like and subscribe and tell your friends, and look forward to many, many more videos on this topic and many others.